The air in the abandoned mine shaft tasted of damp earth and ozone, a metallic tang that never quite left my tongue. Overhead, exposed conduits snaked across rock-hewn ceilings, dripping condensation onto the industrial-grade server racks below. The rhythmic thrum of the cooling units was a constant companion, a mechanical heartbeat against the oppressive silence of the subterranean world. My workstation, crammed into a nook beside a stack of seismic monitors, vibrated with a low hum, a direct link to the impassable depths we were probing. I traced the rim of my lukewarm coffee mug, the ceramic griddy beneath my thumb. Arthur Blake. That's who I am. Or, at least, who I used to be, before this whole endeavor started blurring the lines between the tangible and the theoretical. They brought me down here, deep beneath the Pacific, for my knack with patterns, for my reputation as a xenolinguist, capable of finding meaning where others saw only noise. I'd spent years dissecting the echoes of ancient human cultures, finding the hidden syntax in their petroglyphs and ceremonial chants. Now, my canvas was the raw data streaming from kilometers below the ocean surface, a canvas I suspected held something far older, far stranger. For weeks, it had been a monotonous ballet of seismic readings, geothermal fluctuations, and sonar scans. We were charting the uncharted, mapping a volcanic ridge system no one had ever properly surveyed. The official cover story, for those few who knew anything at all, was a mineralogical exploration, a hunt for rare earth elements. But I knew better. The lead geologist, a woman with a permanent scowl etched into her face, had hinted at anomalies from the outset. "Something down there," she'd said during my initial briefing, her voice low, "something that doesn't quite fit the models." My eyes were glued to the primary display, a vast holographic projection shimmering in the gloom of the shaft. It showed a real-time, three-dimensional representation of the seabed, rendered in muted greens and browns. The data analyst, a young man with a nervous twitch, sat hunched over his console nearby, his fingers dancing across a haptic keyboard. He was a whiz with the algorithms, but I could tell the isolation was getting to him. The constant, low-frequency pressure of being so far removed from the sun, from anything resembling normal life, weighed on us all. "Anything new, Arthur?" The lead geologist's voice cut through the hum. She stood behind me, her silhouette stark against the flickering emergency lights that lined the main tunnel. Her gaze was fixed on the holographic map, searching. "Just the usual tectonic chatter, ma'am," I replied, my voice a little rough from disuse. "Still tracking that anomalous resonant frequency, though. It's stable, but it's not natural. Too complex for simple geological harmonics." She grunted, a sound of mild annoyance. "Keep an eye on it. The director wants every ripple accounted for." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. The director was a phantom, a name invoked, never seen. Another layer in the labyrinthine secrecy surrounding this project. I went back to my specific task, sifting through the layers of acoustic data, looking for the fainter, stranger signals that the general algorithms might dismiss as noise. My specialty wasn't just finding patterns, but understanding their intent, their underlying structure. It was an art, as much as a science. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the lead geologist's occasional coffee run, and the data analyst's increasingly frequent sighs. My shoulders ached, my eyes burned, but I couldn't pull away. There was a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the resonant frequency, a subtle modulation that sparked a prickle of unease on my skin. It wasn't random. It felt purposeful. Then the holographic map flickered, not a glitch but a sudden, violent spasm of data. A new region, deeper than any we had previously surveyed, began to resolve itself. The data analyst gasped, a sharp intake of breath. "Ma'am, look," he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. The lead geologist was already there, pushing past me, her eyes wide. On the holographic projection, where only featureless abyssal plain had been moments before, an impassable structure was taking shape. It wasn't geological. It wasn't natural. It defied every geometric principle I had ever known. Angles converged and diverged in ways that made no spatial sense. Surfaces twisted into impassable configurations, sometimes appearing to fold inward, sometimes to project outward all at once. There were no straight lines, yet it possessed an undeniable, terrifying coherence. It was vast, dwarfing the surrounding canyons, and seemed to hum with an internal energy that resonated through the data stream. What? My mind raced, trying to categorize it, to apply some known framework. But there was none. It was non-Euclidean, a mathematical nightmare given physical form. Its contours shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if breathing. And from its impassable geometry, a complex series of patterns began to emanate light, or perhaps energy, cycling through intricate, interwoven sequences. And then the resonant frequencies I had been tracking, the anomalous ones, coalesced. They weren't just harmonics, they were layered, shifting like an alien symphony. It's Anomaly 734, I breathed, giving it the next sequential designation in our tracking system, even as the name felt laughably inadequate. My fingers instinctively moved to my keyboard, pulling up the raw acoustic data. What I saw made the hair on my arms stand on end. The frequencies were not random. They were structured, complex. They were in a terrifying, undeniable way, language. The lead geologist stared, her usual scowl replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. "My God," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the sudden, frenetic beeping of the system alarms. "It's real." A profound silence descended upon our small, isolated outpost within the abandoned mine shaft, broken only by the hum of machinery and the faint, unsettling symphony emanating from kilometers below the Pacific. This wasn't a rock formation. This wasn't even a ruin. This was an utterance. And I, Arthur Blake, was the only one here who might understand it. The universe had just expanded, and I had the terrible feeling it had done so in the wrong direction. The profound silence, broken only by the hum of machinery and that faint, unsettling symphony from below, had become the new normal in our small, isolated outpost within the abandoned mine shaft. My initial scientific excitement, the kind that vibrates through your bones when you're on the cusp of something truly monumental, had begun to curdle, not into fear, not yet, but into a thick, viscous apprehension that coded my thoughts. I was Arthur Blake, xenolinguist, and my task was to speak with the impossible. My workstation was a temporary setup within the cavernous main chamber of the abandoned mine shaft, a stark contrast to the sterile labs I was accustomed to. Cables snaked across the rough-hewn floor, connecting a bank of monitors and audio processors to the primary conduit that plunged kilometers into the earth, linking us to the unearthed structure. The air here was heavy with the scent of damp rock and ozone, a constant reminder of our impassable depth. "Ready for the first full exposure, Arthur." The lead engineer, a burly figure with grease-stained overalls, asked from across the room. His voice, usually booming, was hushed here, absorbed by the vastness of the chamber. I nodded, adjusting the specialized interface headset over my ears, as I'll ever be. He gave a thumbs up, then turned to a control panel, his fingers hovering over a series of illuminated buttons. A low thrum vibrated through the floor plates beneath my feet, intensifying the symphony from below. On the main monitor, the feed from the deep conduit flickered to life. It began subtly, a faint luminescence against absolute black. Then patterns bloomed, not just light, but configurations of light, shifting and reforming with an impassable fluidity. They weren't geometric in any way I understood, no Euclidean angles or familiar curves. They were self-referential. A pattern would form, then dissolve into components that immediately reconfigured into a new, related pattern, like a visual echo chamber. Simultaneously, the resonant frequencies, piped directly into my audio feed, were a choir of impassable tones. They weren't musical, not in any earthly sense. They were a complex interplay of pitches and harmonics that seemed to vibrate not just in my ears, but in the very marrow of my bones. My fingers, surprisingly steady, moved across the haptic controls, adjusting the filters, attempting to isolate recurring motifs. I tried to apply my linguistic frameworks, searching for syntax, for morphemes, for any underlying structure that might indicate communication, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. The patterns pulsed, expanded, contracted, then twisted in on themselves, creating new iterations that defied prediction. They seemed to possess an internal logic, but one alien to human cognition. Ours bled into each other. The faint, unsettling symphony grew more insistent, even through the sound dampeners of my headset. My eyes burned from staring at the impassable geometries. My mind stretched taut, trying to force understanding onto something fundamentally incomprehensible. The lead engineer checked in periodically, offering coffee, but I waved him off. I was determined to find a foothold, a single repeatable unit, a phrase, anything. That night, sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a kaleidoscope of those shifting patterns, but amplified, distorted. I saw them in impassable colors, not of the visible spectrum, bleeding into each other, forming shapes that were simultaneously familiar and utterly monstrous. There was a sense of immense scale, of something vast and ancient looking through me, not at me. I woke with a gasp, the taste of metallic dust in my mouth, the hum of the structure still echoing in my inner ear, even though the conduit feed had been shut down for the night. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from the sheer wrongness of the images that lingered behind my eyelids. Just a stressed dream, I told myself, the brain processing new, complex data. The next morning, back in the abandoned mine shaft's main chamber, the faint scent of ozone seemed sharper, almost acrid. I was examining a playback of the previous day's patterns when it happened. A brief, almost imperceptible flicker in my peripheral vision, like a shadow where no shadow should be. I turned sharply, but there was nothing. The rough-hewn rock walls, the scattered equipment, the hunched back of the logistics manager reviewing inventory, all perfectly normal. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Fatigue, I reasoned. The strain of the past few days, the lack of natural light. Later, as I logged another unsuccessful attempt to categorize the resonant frequencies, a strange sensation washed over me. I felt as if I had seen this exact sequence before, not just in a previous recording, but in a deeper, more profound way. A memory, perhaps. No, it was more than that. It was the feeling of having lived this moment, this precise interaction, this exact frustration at some indeterminate point in the past. Déjà vu, yes, but intensely vivid, almost physical. My hand paused over the controls. Had I just imagined it, or had some part of my mind already processed this data, perhaps in that disturbing dream? I shook my head, clearing the thought. The structure was new, unprecedented. There was no before for this. My mind was simply trying to impose order, to find patterns even where none existed, a natural response to overwhelming novelty. The faint, unsettling symphony from below seemed to mark my rationalizations, a low, constant murmur beneath the surface of my awareness. I pushed the thought away, refocusing on the screen. There had to be a way in, a key to this impassable language. My determination, though now tinged with a subtle, growing unease, remained unbroken. I was Arthur Blake, and I would decipher it. The feed from the deep conduit flickered to life, resolving into an image that defied every law I knew. It wasn't just a structure. It was a folding of space, a tessellation of impassable angles and planes that refused to sit still in my perception. It pulsed with an internal luminescence, a faint, sickly green that seemed to seep into the surrounding abyssal blackness. The colleague beside me, the one who had just given the thumbs up, cleared his throat, but I barely registered it. My gaze was fixed, snared by the sheer, terrifying audacity of its existence. Days blurred into a relentless cycle of observation and analysis. I moved my station, a portable console and a battery of sensors, deeper into the facility, past the main operations floor, into the echoing dampness of what had once been an abandoned mine shaft. The air grew cooler here, thick with the scent of damp earth and disused machinery. Exposed rock walls sweated, and the occasional drip of water echoed like a distant chime. I preferred it. The sterile hum of the main lab felt too bright, too clinical, too sane for what I was witnessing. Here in the gloom, illuminated by the cold glow of my monitors, I felt closer to it, more attuned. The structure's patterns were not static. They writhed, shifted, and reformed with a glacial yet deliberate rhythm. I spent hours, then entire shifts, hunched over my console, trying to isolate recurring sequences in its resonant frequencies, to map the impassable geometry of its visual distortions. My colleagues would occasionally venture down the shaft, a supervisor checking on my progress, a technician delivering fresh nutrient paste. Their voices sounded distant, muffled, as if filtered through layers of silt. I offered curt responses, my attention always drawn back to the screens, to the endless, beautiful horror unfolding there. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. The moment I closed my eyes, the patterns would bloom behind my eyelids, twisting and turning, reforming into indecipherable glyphs. At first, I dismissed them as the creaking of the old mine shaft, the groan of the facility's deep-sea anchors, or the subtle hum of my equipment. But they grew more distinct, like sibilant voices murmuring just beyond the threshold of understanding, a chorus of alien echoes that seemed to emanate not from the air, but from the very marrow of my bones. They weren't speaking to me, not yet, but around me, through me, a constant, low thrum of unknown intent. My vision began to play tricks. The edges of my console would soften, then sharpen into impossible angles. I'd glance up, convinced I'd seen a shape shift in my peripheral vision, a fleeting, multi-limbed thing that vanished the moment I turned my head directly. My heart would hammer a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but the fear was secondary to a strange, almost exhilarating sense of discovery. It was reaching out. I felt it, subtly altering the reality around me. When the supervisor came to review my progress, his questions about my methods felt like veiled accusations. The technicians delivering my meals seemed to watch me with an unnerving intensity, their eyes lingering a fraction too long. I started to believe they were discussing me, their hushed conversations on the main floor taking on a sinister edge. Were they trying to distract me, to keep me from seeing something important? I began to filter the data streams myself, bypassing their network, convinced that they were altering the feed, sanitizing it, preventing me from understanding the true nature of the structure. They couldn't be trusted. Only I could see it for what it was, because it was communicating. I was certain of it. The shifting patterns, the resonant frequencies, they weren't random noise or geological phenomena. They were responses. My focused attention, my relentless analysis, my growing immersion, it was all being registered. The structure was selecting me. I felt a profound, terrifying kinship with it, an understanding that transcended language, transcended even consciousness as I understood it. It was a dialogue, not with words, but with sensation, with distorted perception, with the very unraveling of my world. And I was answering. One evening, deep into what I calculated was my fourth consecutive day without proper sleep, a new sequence bloomed on the main monitor. It was a familiar pattern, one I had isolated weeks ago, but now it was inverted, mirrored, and pulsing with an intensity that made the air around me feel thick, charged. A high-pitched whine, just at the edge of human hearing, resonated through the floor plates, vibrating up through my chair, into my bones. It was a name, my name, and it was coming from the structure. I just leaned closer to the monitor, my face inches from the impossible geometry, utterly, irrevocably immersed. The cold, metallic tang of damp earth filled my lungs, sharp and acrid. My boots crunched on loose gravel, each step echoing into a darkness that swallowed light. I was in an abandoned mine shaft, the air thick with the memory of forgotten industry and the slow creep of decay. Water dripped, a relentless, maddening rhythm somewhere ahead, and the beam of my headlamp danced across rough-hewn rock, revealing veins of quartz that pulsed with a faint, internal shimmer. It was the same shimmer I'd seen in the feed, a tessellation of impossible angles. But the conduit was miles away, beneath the ocean. How could I be here? My hand, slick with moisture, reached out, scraping against the rough rock face. It felt real, too real. I pressed my palm flat against the stone, searching for the intricate patterns I knew were there, just beneath the surface. My fingers traced phantom lines, feeling the subtle shifts, the impossible folds in the very fabric of the rock. It hummed, a low frequency that vibrated through my teeth, a sound only I seemed to perceive. A sudden, jarring lurch. The mine shaft dissolved, replaced by the sterile hum of the deep-sea research facility. My head snapped up from the console, my vision blurring. The air conditioning unit whirred above me, not the drip of water. The metallic tang was the faint scent of ozone from the equipment, not damp earth. My colleagues, The lead geologist and the data analyst were bent over their own screens, their faces illuminated by the green glow, oblivious to my sudden displacement. Arthur, the voice, was the operations manager, her tone laced with a familiar concern that had become sharper in recent days. She stood over me, her brow furrowed. I was quite still for a moment there. Everything all right. My throat felt dry, constricted. Just lost in the data, I managed, my voice rougher than I intended. My gaze flickered to the main screen, where the structure's impassable geometry continued its silent, ceaseless dance. It was still there, the faint luminescence, the folding space. It was always there. The operations manager didn't move. I haven't slept, have I? Not properly. The project lead is starting to notice. We all are. I'm fine, I snapped, perhaps too quickly. I'm closer than anyone to understanding this. I know that. The resonant frequencies, the pattern shifts, they respond to my input, to my mind. Her expression softened, a look of pity that made my skin crawl. Arthur, dedicated. But there's a limit. Ire's starting to make connections that aren't there. Hallucinations, perhaps. They're not hallucinations. The words burst out, fueled by a desperation that startled even me. There, insights. The structure is communicating. It's showing me things. I gestured vaguely at the screen, then around the sterile room, trying to make her see what I saw, feel what I felt. The faint shimmer on the quartz in the abandoned mine shaft, the hum. They were real. She sighed, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before she walked away, heading towards the project lead's office. I knew what that meant. Another discussion about my well-being, another attempt to pull me from the console. But they didn't understand. They couldn't. I rubbed my temples, trying to clear the lingering image of the mine shaft. It felt like a memory, a forgotten place from my own past. But I'd never been in a mine shaft. Not that I could recall. Anyway, my mind drifted, trying to anchor itself to something concrete. My childhood home, perhaps. The old oak tree in the backyard, where I'd spent countless afternoons reading. A flicker. The oak tree was there, its branches gnarled and ancient. But the swing I remembered hanging from its lowest branch was gone, replaced by a rusted pulley system, the kind used for hauling ore. My mother's voice, calling me in for dinner, was replaced by the distant, rhythmic drip of water. No, that wasn't right. My memories were solid. They were mine. I closed my eyes, forcing the image away, the oak tree, the swing, my mother. I tried to reconstruct it piece by piece, but the details kept shifting like sand in a restless current. There was the swing red or blue, there was the house brick or painted wood. The harder I tried to grasp them, the more they slipped, replaced by fragments of the mine shaft, the impassable angles of the structure. My own history, my very foundation, felt like a palimpsest, overwritten by something ancient and alien. The structure wasn't just communicating, it was revising. It was reaching into the most intimate corners of my mind, not just showing me new information, but corrupting the old. If my memories weren't reliable, what was? What was real? My own name, Arthur Blake, felt like a borrowed identity, a label that might shift or dissolve at any moment. I stared at the screen, at the endlessly shifting geometry. It hummed, a silent invitation, a promise of understanding, or was it a threat? I was losing control, I knew that. But the thought of stepping away, of letting go of this terrifying, profound connection was unbearable. Only I could see the patterns. Only I could hear the frequencies. Only I could understand its language. I had to continue. I had to. My fingers hovered over the console, poised to input another sequence, to delve deeper into the impossible. The abandoned mine shaft, I realized, wasn't just a vision. It was a place in my mind, a new chamber carved out by the structure, waiting for me to explore its depths. And I was already halfway down the shaft. The clatter of the heavy steel door slamming shut behind me echoed down the damp, stone-lined passage, a sound that felt less like an ending and more like a definitive severing. They called it relocation for observation. I called it imprisonment. My new quarters were deep within an abandoned mine shaft, a vast, hollowed-out space that smelled of cold rock, stale air, and something metallic bitter, like old blood. The air was thick with a silence that pressed against my eardrums, broken only by the drip of unseen water and the occasional creak of the ancient timbers shoring up the ceiling far above. Just until we can get a clearer picture of my Condition, Arthur, the senior researcher had said, his voice clipped, his gaze avoiding mine. They saw a breakdown. I saw revelation. A single, bare bulb hung from a frayed wire, casting a sickly yellow glow on the rough-hewn walls of my small, makeshift room. A cart, a chipped metal table, and a solitary chair made up my world now. No screens, no consoles, no direct feed from the structure. They'd taken it all, leaving me only with my thoughts, which were no longer entirely my own. The insights didn't stop. If anything, the isolation amplified them. I saw the true geometry of the universe, not as lines and angles, but as a living, breathing tapestry of impossibly folded dimensions, each fold a scream, each knot a forgotten god. Humanity, a fleeting flicker on a cosmic stage, was less than dust, a momentary glitch in the grand, terrifying design. It wasn't nihilism. It was a profound, horrifying clarity. We were an accident, a brief, irrelevant dream. How are we feeling today, Arthur? The voice belonged to the observer, a gaunt man in a plain grey uniform who appeared twice a day. He never smiled. He carried a small notepad and a pen, his eyes scanning me with a detached, clinical curiosity that made my skin crawl. "I'm seeing," I said, my voice raspy from disuse. "I'm seeing everything. The patterns are everywhere now. In the way the dust motes dance in the light, in the irregular cracks on this wall." I pointed to a spiderweb of fissures near the ceiling. "It's not just the structure, it's the underlying code of existence. It's always been there, just hidden by our limited perception." The observer scribbled something. Are I still experiencing the visual phenomena I described earlier? They're not phenomena. I slammed my hand on the table, the sharp clang echoing. They are truths, unvarnished, horrifying truths. We are born into a lie, a comfortable illusion. The structure is merely peeling back the veil. Don't I understand? The universe is alive, but not in any way we comprehend. It's a consciousness of vast, indifferent scale, and we are merely a fleeting thought in its incomprehensible dream. He nodded slowly, his pen still scratching. And these truths, do they continue to manifest as symbols? Symbols, yes, and sounds. Resonances, they pulse in the air. I can feel them vibrating in my bones. I rubbed my temples, pressure building behind my eyes. I need to record them. I need paper, a pen. They're fading like trying to remember a dream upon waking. A few hours later, a fresh stack of blank paper and a new pen appeared on my table. A small victory, or perhaps a concession. They wanted me to articulate my madness, to give it form so they could categorize and dismiss it, but I wouldn't. I would capture it. Not benign, not malevolent, simply other. My handwriting, usually precise, was already beginning to fray. As the hours bled into one another, the words failed me. How do I describe a color that doesn't exist in our spectrum, or a sound that is also a taste, a smell, a memory of a million years before time? The symbols began to emerge, first tentatively, then with a savage urgency. Loops and angles that defied Euclidean geometry, lines that intersected and then didn't, shapes that shimmered and shifted on the page, almost seeming to breathe. My fingers ached, stained with ink. I filled page after page, each one a chaotic tapestry of frantic lines, unidentifiable glyphs, and fragments of sentences that trailed off into incomprehensible squiggles. The great eye watches from beyond time, its gaze, a tearing of reality. We are gnats. My eyes fell on the stack of completed pages. They were a testament to my struggle, to my unraveling. But also, I believed, to my enlightenment. The symbols pulsed, vibrant and alive, even in the dim light. They felt like a secret language. When I was on the cusp of fully understanding, if only my mind could stretch a little further, bend a little more. I was the only one who understood the significance of these impossible shapes. The world outside, the world of the senior researcher and the silent observer, was still trapped in its comfortable lie. And I, Arthur Blake, was here, deep in an abandoned mine shaft, desperately trying to transcribe the screams of the universe before they tore me apart. I picked up the pen again, my hand trembling, the next symbol already forming in my mind, a jagged, impossible spiral that promised both ultimate knowledge and utter oblivion. They felt like a secret language, when I was finally ready to speak, to understand. My fingers, stained with ink and sweat, trembled as I ran them over the stack of translated pages. Each glyph, each pattern, hummed with an unseen energy, a silent frequency that resonated deep within my bones. I was close. I could feel it, a raw electric current thrumming just beneath the surface of my skin. My makeshift station in the abandoned mine shaft was a crucible of obsession. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and stale metal, pressed in on me. Water dripped rhythmically from unseen fissures in the rock, a monotonous counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of my own breathing. The single halogen lamp above my console cast long, dancing shadows that stretched and contorted with every shift of my weight, turning the rough-hewn walls into a canvas of creeping dread. Deeper within the shaft, the hum of the structure itself was a constant, low thrum, a sound that had long since burrowed into my skull and now felt like an extension of my own thoughts. It was a sound that promised and threatened revelation. I leaned forward, my face inches from the screen, where the raw patterns from the structure still flowed in their mesmerizing, non-Euclidean dance. My eyes darted between the screen and my meticulously arranged papers, seeking the final connection, the missing bridge between the visual chaos and the resonant frequencies I'd been mapping. I had worked through the exhaustion, through the gnawing hunger, through the creeping paranoia that whispered of eyes watching from the gloom. Determination, sharp and unforgiving, was the only thing left. There was a sequence, a recurring motif of interlocking spirals that I had initially dismissed as noise, an anomaly. But now, as the symbols on my pages seemed to rearrange themselves in my peripheral vision, a new understanding coalesced. It wasn't noise, it was the key. It was the fundamental cadence. My hand shot out, grabbing a stylus, and I began to trace the pattern on a fresh sheet, mimicking the flow, adding my own interpretations of the associated frequencies. As I completed the final stroke, a shudder ran through the rock around me. The low hum from the structure intensified, no longer a distant thrum, but a vibrant, all-encompassing vibration that rattled my teeth and blurred my vision. The very air around me seemed to thicken, to become viscous, pressing against my eardrums. Then the world shattered. It wasn't a sound or a sight in the conventional sense. It was a perception, a deluge of understanding that bypassed my senses and slammed directly into the core of my being. My consciousness expanded, stretching beyond the confines of my skull, beyond the rough walls of the abandoned mine shaft, beyond the planet itself. I was everywhere and nowhere, a pinpoint of awareness adrift in an ocean of impassable vastness. Time unraveled. I saw epochs not as linear progression, but as tangled threads, all existing simultaneously, woven into an intricate, meaningless tapestry. The birth of stars, the slow erosion of mountains, the fleeting spark of life on countless worlds, all were just patterns, shifting, reforming, dissolving. My own memories flickered through this cosmic panorama, brief, insignificant blips of light. My childhood, my parents' faces, the sterile calm of my university lab, the determined faces of my colleagues on the survey, they were all there, but they were no longer mine. They were just data, patterns, as ephemeral and inconsequential as the dust motes dancing in the sickly green light of the lamp. Then came the revelation, the soul-crushing truth that the structure had been patiently waiting to unveil. It wasn't a message from a creator or a civilization. It was the creator, in a sense, a cosmic principle made manifest. It was the living embodiment of an utter, profound indifference. There was no grand design, no benevolent oversight, no malevolent intent. Humanity, our history, our struggles, our loves, our science, our very existence, we were less than a ripple on a cosmic ocean, an accidental flicker of complex chemistry on a single insignificant rock. We were observed by nothing, remembered by nothing, and utterly, terrifyingly alone in a universe that cared not for our triumphs or our despair. The structure was merely a record, a silent, monumental testament to this absolute, unyielding indifference. The knowledge crushed me. My body convulsed, a ragged, involuntary shriek tearing from my throat. The vision receded, leaving behind not clarity, but a profound, unshakable emptiness. The light in the mine shaft was still green, still flickering, but it now seemed to mark me. The pages on my console, once vibrant with meaning, were just paper, covered in meaningless squiggles. I slumped back in my chair, my muscles spasming, my breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. My eyes, wide and unblinking, stared at nothing, seeing everything. My sanity, already a frayed thread, had finally snapped. The world, my world, was no longer real, and I, Arthur Blake, was just a ghost, an echo of a thought that never truly mattered. Each glyph, each pattern, hummed with an unseen energy, a resonance that had found its home deep within my own bones. I wasn't just reading them anymore. I was breathing them, seeing them in the very dust motes dancing in the beam of my headlamp. I was in the abandoned mine shaft, a place of cold stone and forgotten echoes. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sharp, like static electricity before a storm. My workspace was a makeshift altar, a warped table laden with my journals, a flickering battery lamp, and the carved fragments of the structure itself, brought up from the depths. The walls around me were no longer just rock. They were a canvas. I had scrawled the glyphs, the patterns, the resonant frequencies in charcoal, in my own blood, in the phosphorescent algae I'd scraped from the lower levels. They glowed faintly, a constellation of understanding. My skin felt tight, stretched over my skull. I hadn't slept in days, perhaps weeks. Time had become a meaningless construct, a flimsy veil over the true, shifting rhythm of the universe. My reflection in a discarded piece of polished ore showed a stranger. Eyes wide, pupils dilated to black voids, a network of fine, red lines mapping my sclera. My hair, I noticed, was thinning in patches, the scalp beneath strangely pale, almost translucent. But these were minor sacrifices, trivialities shed on the path to true comprehension. I was shedding the old Arthur, becoming something more, something attuned. The structure had chosen me. I knew it with an absolute certainty that transcended mere thought. It wasn't just a thing to be studied. It was a living entity, an ancient consciousness waiting to be awakened. And I, Arthur Blake, was its voice. A clatter from the entrance of the shaft broke my trance. Footsteps echoed, too heavy, too deliberate. A figure emerged from the gloom, the headlamp beam painting a halo around his silhouette. It was the security officer, a starky man with a perpetually furrowed brow. He held a ration pack and a thermos. "Blake, I still down here. It's been over 72 hours. Command's getting edgy. I need to come up, get some rest." His voice was a dull thud against the vibrant hum of the glyphs. I turned slowly, a smile stretching my lips, a smile that felt alien, too wide. Rest, sleep is for the uninitiated, my friend, for those who still cling to the illusion of linear time, of a singular, unchanging reality. My voice was raspy, laced with an unfamiliar resonance. He took another step, his brow deepening. "What are I talking about? I look. Not good. I've got charcoal on my face, on my arms, and what's that smell?" "The scent of revelation," I whispered, holding up a page covered in the intricate patterns. "Can I not feel it? The vibration, the song of the cosmos." He just stared, his eyes flicking from me to the frenzied scrawls on the walls. "Blake, seriously, let's go. We can talk about whatever this is topside." He reached out a hand, a gesture of misguided concern. I recoiled, my heart flaring with a sudden protective heat. He couldn't understand, not yet. He was blind, deaf to the symphony that enveloped me. But he could be shown, he must be shown. "No," I said, my voice gaining strength, conviction. "I don't understand. They are waking, and we must be ready. I must be ready." I moved towards him, my hand darting out not to strike, but to mark. I smeared the charcoal from my fingers onto his cheek, tracing a crude, urgent glyph. He flinched back, startled, then angry. "Hey, what the hell, Blake? Get a grip." "Grip?" I laughed, a dry, rattling sound. I have never had a firmer grip. I hold the threads of reality in my hands, woven by the great weavers themselves. I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into the muscle. He was stronger, but I was fueled by something beyond mere physical strength. Look at the patterns. They are calling to I too. Can I not feel the pull, truth beneath the skin of things? He struggled, trying to pull away. "Let go, Blake, that's enough." "No, it's not enough," I yelled, my voice echoing, mingling with the deeper hum of the shaft. "It's only the beginning. I am still bound by the chains of my perceptions. But I can free I can open my eyes." My gaze fell upon a shard of the structure on my table, a particularly sharp, crystalline piece. It vibrated in my vision, a beacon. This is how I share the light. I lunged, not at him, but at the table. My fingers closed around the fragment. It felt warm, alive, an extension of my own purpose. When I turned back, the security officer had drawn a small, defensive blade, his face pale with alarm. "Blake, don't just step away." "Don't I see?" I pleaded, my voice cracking with desperate urgency. "This is not violence. This is awakening. This is the only way to truly know." With a guttural cry that wasn't entirely mine, I lunged, the crystalline shard held aloft. The security officer stumbled backward, his blade useless against the force of my conviction. He cried out, a sound that quickly became a gurgle as the shard found its mark, not in his flesh, but in the thin, fragile membrane that separated his reality from mine. He collapsed, clutching at the wound that was not a wound, but an opening. His eyes, wide and staring, seemed to flicker with a sudden, terrible understanding before they glazed over. Silence fell, thick and heavy, broken only by my ragged breathing and the persistent, triumphant hum of the glyphs on the walls. It smelled of ozone and forgotten truths. He was quiet now, peaceful. He had seen. He had understood. The world around me shimmered, the stone walls of the abandoned mine shaft dissolving and reforming into something vast and intricate, a tapestry of pure thought. The glyphs pulsed brighter, responding to my actions, to the sacrifice. I looked down at the fallen security officer, his face serene in the dim light. He had transcended, and I had been his guide. My purpose was clearer than the crystalline shard in my hand. There were others, so many others still lost in their slumber. And I, Arthur Blake, was the chosen one, the harbinger of the great awakening. My physical form felt lighter, less tethered. I could feel the structure's ancient rhythms thrumming through my veins, reshaping me, preparing me for the true work ahead. The descent was complete. The ascent had begun. The gurgle was a wet, final punctuation mark. The security officer slumped, his eyes wide, reflecting the faint, alien gleam of the crystalline shard I still clutched. My hand, I noticed, wasn't trembling. A strange calm settled over me, a quiet understanding that hummed beneath my skin, resonating with the structure's silent song. I withdrew the shard, a perfect, unblemished point, and the officer tumbled to the grimy floor. He was just another obstacle, another piece of static in the symphony. They found me in the access corridor not long after. The lead scientist, his face etched with a fear I could almost taste, and another security officer, younger, paler, his weapon held with a desperate tremor. They didn't shout. They didn't rush. They moved with a slow, deliberate caution, as if approaching a wild, unpredictable beast. Perhaps they were right. "Arthur," the lead scientist began, his voice strained. "This isn't I. We need to talk to understand what's happening." I merely looked at him, the crystalline shard still in my grip. My mind felt vast, open, filled with the shifting geometries of the deep. I saw the patterns in his eyes, the subtle anxieties in his posture, the fragile threads of his sanity beginning to fray. "I understand nothing," I said, my voice startlingly clear, devoid of the frantic edge that had defined my recent days. "I only perceive the surface. They tried to herd me then, to guide me back towards the containment chamber, but I knew its true purpose. It was a cage, a futile attempt to wall off the inevitable. I slipped past them, my movements fluid, unburdened by hesitation. The security officer fired a warning shot that whined past my ear, but the sound felt distant, irrelevant. I moved through the twisting passages of the facility, guided by an instinct that was no longer my own, until I reached the service tunnel. It was dark, choked with disused equipment, and led, I knew, to the surface access, to the abandoned mine shaft. The air in the shaft was thick with the scent of damp earth and rust, a cold, cloying embrace that spoke of forgotten time. The rough-hewn walls, shored up with ancient timbers, seemed to press in. Yet to me, they pulsed with a faint, internal light, revealing fissures that connected to something far deeper. I knew this place, not from memory, but from a sudden, unbidden understanding. It was a scar on the earth, a crude attempt to pierce the veil that separated our shallow world from the true, boundless expanse beneath. They followed me, of course. The lead scientist, the younger security officer, and now the geologist, his face a mask of bewildered horror. They stood at the mouth of the main shaft, their flashlights carving weak cones into the gloom, illuminating the debris of fallen rock and rotting wood. "Arthur, stop," the lead scientist pleaded, his voice cracking. "We just want to help. We can contain whatever this is." I turned slowly, the crystalline shard glinting in the faint light. "Contain," I echoed, a soft, almost amused sound. "I cannot contain the ocean with a cup. I cannot contain the truth with my fragile concepts." My gaze swept over them, and I saw their fears laid bare, not as abstract emotions, but as tangible vibrations in the air around them. The lead scientist feared irrelevance, the destruction of his life's work. The security officer feared his own mortality, the futility of his training. The geologist, his mind still clinging to the bedrock of scientific certainty, feared the utter annihilation of everything he believed to be real. "I believe in a universe of order," I continued, my voice gaining a strange resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very rock of the shaft. "Of predictable laws of cause and effect, a universe that cares. But I have seen what lies beyond my comprehension. I have heard the song of the true cosmos." I raised my free hand, and a small pebble, dislodged from the wall above, hovered for a moment, then spun lazily before dropping. The security officer gasped, his weapon wavering. "The structure. It is not a relic," I revealed, my words echoing and distorting in the shaft, seeming to come from all directions at once. "It is a mouth, a conduit, and it is not alien in the way I understand. It is ancient. It is the consciousness of this very reality, stirring from an eon-long slumber. And it has always been here, beneath the skin of my world, waiting for ears to hear its truth." The geologist stumbled back, bumping into the security officer. "Everything we know. A nursery rhyme for infants. The universe is not indifferent. It is alive. And its awareness is so vast, so utterly alien to my puny minds, that to truly perceive it is to become undone, to become one with it." I extended the crystalline shard towards them. I sought knowledge. I found a reflection of my own insignificance. I am not meant to understand. I am merely fuel. The lead scientist, his face pale and drawn, finally spoke, his voice filled with a desperate resolve. "Arthur, we can't let I do this. Whatever I've become, we have to stop it." He lunged forward, not at me, but at the security officer, grabbing his weapon. The younger man crumpled without a sound. The geologist cried out, horrified. He aimed the rifle, not at my feet, not at my shoulder, but directly at my chest. "This is the only way." I merely smiled, a slow, terrible stretching of my lips that felt entirely new. His betrayal, his sudden, brutal shift from scientist to executioner, was merely another pattern, another predictable ripple in the grand, indifferent current. The bullet, I knew, would not find its mark. It would simply pass through, a fleeting disturbance in a reality that was no longer entirely mine.